monsters. Charles Joseph Whitman was born on June 24th, 1941, in Lake Worth, Florida. He grew up in a middle-class suburban family. His father was a self-employed plumber, and his mother was a homemaker. Charles had two siblings, brothers Patrick and John. Charles' father, Charles Adolphus Whitman, ran his household with an iron fist. His wife was expected to carry out her duties according to his stringent specifications. He also expected a high standard from his children. The consequences for failing to please him were harsh, to say the least. He would cut them no slack whatsoever, regardless of the circumstances. Charlie Jr. was fondly remembered by his neighbors as a polite, playful, and mischievous imp. He was never cruel and was unfailingly courteous. Most of the parenting was left to Margaret, as Charles Sr. was a staunch believer in the nuclear family model. Given the era when Charles was growing up, it was hardly a rarity. So, the Whitman household was typical for its time. The demands of cleaning a house top to bottom and raising 3 boys began to take a toll on Margaret after a while, and due to burnout, she began to make mistakes. This Charles Sr. would not abide. The way he saw it, there was no such thing as a mistake. Only a failure to attend to one's duties with the requisite standard of conscientiousness. He made it known that failure was a sign that one wasn't trying hard enough. He was a self-made man, and the hardships he fought his way through instilled this attitude in him. He felt that because he provided for them as well as he had, with a new car, the best house on the block, and the finest and latest fashions for Margaret, the least they could give him in return was to attend to their responsibilities with the same level of dedication. Charles Sr. felt betrayed by his family when he saw that they didn't always live up to his expectations. He was deeply disappointed. He lashed out at Margaret before the boys. He beat her and disallowed her from going shopping for a few days, forcing her to prepare meals with leftovers. There was no decline in the quality, a testimony to the fear she felt. She would even smile for him, so dedicated was she to playing the role of perfect wife. Charles Sr. was a little more lenient with the boys, understanding that children don't comprehend life and their role within the world as an adult does. Nevertheless, he expected them to be exceptional, as he would accept nothing less from his progeny. Before elevating their standards of conduct and performance, they would not find his respect for them to be forthcoming. Charles was an orphan, so he had never gotten the kind of respect that comes from family. Due to that lack of experience in that area, he assumed that the respect a son gains from his father must be earned. He felt that his family was supposed to respect him devoid of conditions, but ultimately that turned out to be a product of magical thinking. Most children resist efforts to make them more responsible. It's a long process, often taking years of trial and error and mistakes. He would dole out the backhand whenever he was dissatisfied with their performance, as he had with their mother. Charles Sr. was also frustrated by Margaret's parenting style, feeling she was too laissez-faire, with a tendency to pander. It was from her that they got their praise and recognition, even when it came to accomplishments that their father considered too insignificant to be noteworthy. The way he saw this, it established her as a weak parental role model and undermined his endeavor to mold them into the kind of men he had become. She could only show them affection when their father wasn't around. For this, she was disciplined even more often. He had transcended the role of husband and became her patriarch. Patrick and John routinely disappointed Charles Sr., but his namesake did not. Charles Jr. was determined to gain his father's approval. Charles Sr. was impressed enough with the boy's attitude that he taught him how to hunt. When Jr. was strong enough to carry a squirrel rifle, he and his father would be out at the crack of dawn. They started with shooting targets to develop Jr.'s ability for marksmanship. Eventually, the patriarch became impatient to instill his passion for the sport in his son. Though Jr. was a crack shot when it came to targets, killing was something he did not have a stomach for. Since his father had no stomach for disappointment, especially when it came to his family, he was dismayed upon making this discovery. Charles Sr. felt it was incumbent upon him, from a moral standpoint, to ensure that his son become a proficient hunter. Not wanting to let his father down, Jr. began shooting squirrels from trees. On weekends, he and his father would hunt deer with the pastor of their church in tow. Charlie became a better marksman with every passing day, and the compassion he felt for the animals he killed diminished over time. His father was not at all impressed by the gains Jr. made while taking piano lessons, which his mother had arranged. The lessons and practice became enough a fixture of his life that the Whitmans purchased a piano so that his daily practice could be monitored. Though his father's reception to the piano lessons was lukewarm, he approved at least of the fact that daily practice would be a positive form of discipline that would leave him striving for perfection, so the patriarch allowed it. His father would leave his belt atop the piano as a reminder of what would come his way should he have shirked his daily exercises on the ivories. While the pressure of performing under threat of corporal punishment would have been more than the average child could bear, Charles Jr. rose to the challenge and pushed himself to improve consistently. As a child, Charles's IQ was tested. He was found to have a genius-level IQ of 138. His academic record did not reflect this, as he was unable to juggle his schoolwork with all the demands made on his time at home. Between piano lessons, hunting, and homework, it was just too much for such a young boy. He was so used to brute physical violence as a consequence of failure that he became convinced that he must be at the top of his class. He saw academic achievement from an absolutist's perspective. There is the top and there is the bottom, with no room in between the two ends of the spectrum for anything else. Still, there was never really enough time to get everything done, and his father was always there with his belt in the event that something was not completed or done correctly. When Junior was confronted with a problem he could not solve, he took his father's advice and adopted more responsibilities. When he enrolled in high school, he became involved in more extracurricular activities. He joined the baseball team and became their star pitcher. He went out for football. He joined the Boy Scouts of America. He became an Eagle Scout at the age of 12, which by then was the youngest age that anyone had ever become an Eagle Scout. For this, his father praised him, a rarity, and even then, reservedly. He won the God and Country Award. He even made his old man smile. The only pressure Margaret put on the children was to attend church every Sunday. They were Catholics, and all three of her sons became altar boys. Junior took on a paper route, another move inspired by his father, who was a big believer in capitalism and the money by which an individual could become empowered. On rainy days, his mother would drive him as he went about his route. These marked the only occasions when he experienced real, unconditional love. It was also when he witnessed normal families as they went about their lives. Their children didn't live with the constant threat of physical abuse and emotional neglect for failing to achieve perfection. Anger began to well up inside of Charles. There were limited avenues of expression. He wouldn't be able to lash out against his father without getting the beating of his life. If he acted out at school, he would ruin his future. It was at the firing range and in the woods where he expressed his rage. He had always been a crack shot, but with his newfound passion for the sport, he was a death machine, operating at a level of efficiency that even seasoned hunters, 3 times his age, were incapable of. He could pluck a squirrel's eye out with keen deliberation. He was that good. Charles became unwell in his teen years and was diagnosed with appendicitis, whereupon he was admitted to a hospital for an appendectomy. His father never visited him in the hospital, viewing illness as a failure on some level. He also likely felt that the care Charles received during his convalescence was a form of mollycoddling. Margaret and Charles's brothers visited, knowing that outside of his home people could be supportive and loving, and that a person could thrive under those circumstances just as well, if not better, was revelatory for Charles. Knowing that a better life awaited him outside the doors of his father's home, Charles began to devise a plan of escape. It was at that time that his father phoned in some favors from his friends in the business community to help him land some college placements for Charles. It wasn't just his childhood that Senior had planned. He had his son's adulthood mapped out, and Charles was expected to embody what Senior viewed as a perfect son. He did give his son some freedom. He gave all 3 of his sons motorcycles. Part of his motivation for giving one to his namesake was that it would get him out of the house and sever him from his mother's apron strings. One night when Charlie Jr. was about to graduate, he attended a kegger and came home drunk. When he arrived home, exhibiting signs of inebriation, his father punched him in the head and kicked him once he was on the ground. Junior fell into their pool and nearly drowned. That was when he decided to move out of his father's home. Weighing his options for his future, which meant pursuing business studies at university or enlisting in the Marine Corps, he opted for the latter. Somehow that seemed safer. July 6th, 1959. Junior took a train to Paris Island to enlist in the Corps. His father tried using his connections in the government to have his son declared unfit, but his case was not convincing. Charlie Whitman found it easy to adapt to life in the Marines. He was used to getting up and exercising every day, which he had been doing as a high school athlete. He was used to keeping his belongings neat and clean because that was required of him at home. As far as the pressure put on him by commanding officers, it was something he was used to coming from his father. If anything, the Marines was a little less intense. It certainly didn't keep him from excelling. He frequently scored in the top percentile when it came to tests. He was a seasoned marksman, so there was no learning curve when it came to shooting. He was considered officer material and was recommended for officer training. He was offered an opportunity to study at university with funding by the military. He chose to study mechanical engineering at Austin, Texas. He didn't want to be too far from his mother, but he wanted to get as far away from his father as possible. So this was a compromise. On the Austin University campus was a 307-foot tower known as the Gothic Victorian Tower. One day Whitman said to one of his friends, "A single man could hold off an army from up there." Charlie married a girl named Kathleen Leisner. His family went but contributed nothing financially to the proceedings and left early. It caused Charlie Jr. a great deal of tension, and he felt uncomfortable expressing displays of affection publicly that day, even to his bride. With the pressure of married life and all the extracurricular activities that took up his time, Charlie was unable to keep his grades up. He fell into a depression, feeling like an imposter who didn't deserve any of the perks that came his way. When the Marine Corps received word that he wasn't performing at the desired level at university, they sent him a letter summoning him to active duty at once. He and Kathleen vowed to keep their marriage alive. Charlie didn't enjoy the Marines so much this time around. Now that he had had a taste of what real life was like, being in the military gave him a comparably drab perspective. He struggled just to achieve mediocrity. With every passing day, he felt pressured to be like his father, and he knew he definitely did not want to emulate his father. He hated it when commanding officers barked orders at him. Charlie's thoughts and feelings took a turn for the dark and morbid. He became a compulsive gambler. All his life he had emphasized order over chaos. With gambling, he embraced chaos and loved the rush that came from the uncertain and the unknown. He kept a journal at this time, especially when he was imprisoned for brandishing a gun at a Marine who owed him a gambling debt. His ruminations in the journal dwelt on his view of the Marine Corps, of which he took an increasingly dim view. He saw the Corps as predatory and deceptive as they sold themselves as a redemptive means of salvation. His experience was that it was a grim situation where men were treated like machines. He made lists of all the ways in which the Corps was inefficient, and he expressed at length his regret at enlisting in the first place. For money lending and possession of an unauthorized firearm, Charlie was demoted back down to private, sentenced to 30 days of confinement and 90 days of hard labor. In 1964, he was honorably discharged and returned to Texas. Charlie Whitman planned to return to university. Just as he resumed his studies, Kathleen graduated and began her career in teaching. In their new suburban neighborhood, Charlie would do his daily morning exercises with a full viewing audience of bored, lonely housewives and local boys who would try to keep up with him as he went on his morning run. Charlie became aware of his position as the neighborhood role model for boys and became a scoutmaster. Though it made him uncomfortable calling his father to ask for financial assistance, Charlie had no other means of getting tuition. His father was happy to give him the tuition funds and any other financial aid he might need. Charlie knew it meant that he would, to some degree, spend the subsequent few years under his father's thumb, but it was a sacrifice he was willing to make to gain his independence in the long run. Charlie would resume his studies in mechanical engineering. Charles Whitman looked up at the tower in the center of U of A different man. He was majoring in architecture and had taken on 2 part-time jobs. Though Kathleen didn't complain about supporting them both temporarily, the situation was emasculating for Charlie, so he worked part-time while maintaining a B average. He enjoyed taking the elevator to the observation deck of the tower and enjoying the vista that overlooked the campus and the city of Austin. Margaret decided to leave and divorce Charles Sr. His brother John also decided to leave after getting in trouble with the law and facing either a fine for residency with his father. Charlie wired him the money immediately. The problem was, Charlie was now no longer so sure that his father would pay his tuition for the following semester. A very stressful period in Charlie's life began. He was working 2 jobs and going to school. He was helping his mother out with her new life. His father found his phone number and began calling at all hours of the day and night. His father went for manipulation when he called, claiming to be lovesick for Margaret, hoping that Charlie would put in a good word for him. The stress took a toll on Charlie's health. He was barely sleeping or eating. Chronic fatigue syndrome set in, and a campus doctor prescribed Dexedrine, which is an amphetamine. It'll rev your engine, but it won't alleviate your feelings of stress. Amphetamines are like gasoline once the fires of anxiety are burning. Nevertheless, Charlie felt rejuvenated. For all his life up to that point, Charlie was not known for being impulsive. Now he had decided to pack a bag and take to the road. His idea was to drive until he ran out of money and gas. He had been beholden to so many people, and now he wanted to be free, with no expectations of him. His friend Larry talked him out of it. Charlie contacted the doctor at school for fear that he was becoming mentally ill. The worst manifestation of this was when he struck Kathleen. He didn't even realize it until he had done it. He was horrified. He had become his father, the last thing he wanted. He begged for her forgiveness, and she accepted his apologies. But he was still beside himself with remorse. Wishing to restore the more civilized Charlie Whitman, he took pen to paper to organize his thoughts, feelings, and plans. Every day he would type, "Thoughts to start the day." These were affirmations that were meant to motivate him. An example: stop procrastinating, grasp the nettle. Control your anger. Don't let it prove you a fool. Smile. It's contagious. Don't be belligerent. Stop cursing. Improve your vocabulary. Approach a pot of gold with exceptional caution. Look it over twice. Pay that compliment. Listen more than you speak. Think before you speak. Control your passion. Don't let it lead you. Don't let desire make you regret your present actions later. If you want to be better than the average, you have to work much harder than the average. Never forget, when the going gets rough, the rough get going. That's the kind of motivational speaker claptrap I see on my TikTok feed every day. He did the same with his marriage. If he and his wife had a disagreement, he would make a list like the following: don't nag, don't try to take your partner over, don't criticize, give honest appreciation, pay little attentions, be courteous, be gentle. Out-earning his father was not a concern for him, but he wanted to outdo him morally. Charlie decided to see a psychiatrist at U of A. The doctor who referred him prescribed Valium. Dexedrine piled more stress on top of him, and he was struggling with all the responsibilities he had taken on. The psychiatrist he was referred to diagnosed him as a, quote, massive, muscular youth oozing with hostility. Charlie notified the doctor that he was experiencing mood swings that caused him to fly into senseless rages. He had struck his wife twice. At one point, he said to the doctor, "Something is happening to me. I don't seem like myself." The doctor told him that his relationship with his father in his childhood was the cause of all his anger. One source of his anger was his insecurity at feeling like he was a loser. He failed at school. He wasn't doing as well at work as he would have liked. His wife was out-earning him. Her father would give them money on occasion. He felt like he wasn't independent enough. His wife worshipped him, but he had imposter syndrome. He had always been a troubled young man, and now it was worse than ever. The doctor was convinced that Charlie's parents' divorce was causing his then current anger and stress. Whatever the primary cause, at one point Charlie said to him, "Sometimes I think about going up the big tower in the middle of campus with a deer rifle and shooting people." These days, any mandated reporter would notify authorities if someone declared their intentions to carry out a mass shooting, which have become embedded in America's culture and heritage since Columbine. However, while Charlie Whitman was being evaluated, the doctor presumed that he was so logical he would never have even considered doing such a thing. Also, he had seen many students who were contemplating suicide or homicide as a product of coping with the stress of early adulthood, and the tower always figured prominently in the fantasies, which were never realized. Whitman walked away from this session feeling worse than when he arrived. It had dug up a can of worms he would have preferred not to unearth. He also didn't like the effects the drugs were having on him. The Valium made him feel detached, and the Dexedrine exacerbated his anxiety and rage. He hated the idea of departing from the earth as a nobody. He wanted to carry out some kind of act before snuffing out his own light. There were two people keeping him from doing that, Kathleen and his mother. He knew they relied on him, and he couldn't put them through the hardship of feeling lost in the world in the event of his absence. August 1st, 1966. This date was going to play a historic role in both the life of Charlie Whitman and the University of Austin. It would be the day when Charles would end it all for himself and many others. He wrote a letter to be read by anybody who took any interest in the event. "I don't quite understand what compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it is to leave some vague reason for the actions I have recently performed. I don't really understand myself these days. I am supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I can't recall when it started. I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts. These thoughts constantly recur, and it takes a tremendous mental effort to concentrate on useful or progressive tasks." While he was working on the letter, two of his friends dropped by unexpectedly. When one of them asked him what he was working on, he said, "Just some letters to old friends." Friends had observed a change in Charlie as of late. He was more relaxed. He was enjoying life more. He wasn't taking his grades as seriously, and had also taken a more casual attitude about work. Now that he was looking to end it all, none of those things mattered to him quite as much. He even stated in opposition to the war in Vietnam, which was a significant switch from his previous pro-military position. He elaborated on the change that had come over him in his final testament. In March, when my parents made a physical break, I noticed a great deal of stress. I consulted a Dr. Cochran at the University Health Center and asked him to recommend someone that I could consult about some psychiatric disorders I felt I had. I talked with a doctor once for about 2 hours and tried to convey to him my fears that I felt come overwhelming violent impulses. After one session, I never saw the doctor again, and since then, I have been fighting my mental turmoil alone, and seemingly to no avail. After my death, I wish that an autopsy would be performed on me to see if there is any visible physical disorder. I have had some tremendous headaches in the past and consumed 2 large bottles of Excedrin in the past 3 months. It was after much thought that I decided to kill my wife, Kathy, tonight, after I pick her up from work at the telephone company. I love her dearly, and she has been as fine a wife to me as any man could ever hope to have. I cannot rationally pinpoint any specific reason for doing this. I don't know whether it is selfishness, or if I don't want her to face the embarrassment that my actions would surely cause her. At this time, though, the prominent reason in my mind is that I truly do not consider this world worth living in, and am prepared to die, and I do not want to leave her to suffer alone in it. I intend to kill her as painlessly as possible. That same evening, Charlie drove to his mother's apartment. He was armed with a knife and a handgun. He executed a karate punch called Suzuki. It landed on her hand and knocked the diamond out of her engagement ring. The blow knocked gold right into bone. He nearly knocked her fingers right off. As Margaret surveyed the mess he made of her hand, he drew his knife and brandished it. She was shocked when she looked down at her chest and found that a knife was lodged between her ribs. She fell to the floor and went into shock. Blood gushed out as she convulsed. As Charlie saw it, the task was not yet finished. He pulled the gun out from the back of his pants and shot her once in the back of her head. Silence befell the room after he turned her lights out with the pistol. He lifted her corpse and placed it on her bed. He cleaned his knife off on one of her skirts. He rearranged the clothing so that her dignity wouldn't be affected when the authorities examined the scene. He decided it was crucial that he write a letter about why he killed his mother, so that others wouldn't view it as a pointless and senseless act of violence. He wrote it at 12:30 a.m. on August 1st. It went as follows: "To whom it may concern, I have taken my mother's life. I am very upset about having done it. However, I feel that if there is a heaven, then she is definitely there now. And if there is no life after, I have relieved her of her suffering here on earth. The intense hatred I feel for my father is beyond description. My mother gave that man the 25 best years of her life, and she finally took enough of his beatings, humiliation, and degradation, and tribulations that I'm sure that nobody but she and he will ever know. He has chosen to treat her like a slut that you would bed down with, accept her favors, and then throw a pittance in return. I am truly sorry that this is the only way I could see to relieve her sufferings, but I think it was best. Let there be no doubt in your mind that I loved that woman with all my heart. If there exists a God, let him understand my actions and judge me accordingly. He thought he was able to carry out his act of matricide without emotion, but on the way home he began to cry so hard the car wobbled as he drove. Charlie moved on to the next important woman in his life. He stood in his bedroom with his knife poised in Kathleen's direction. Delaying it only made it feel worse, so he leapt onto her chest, knife first. The blade plunged into her heart. It didn't even scrape her ribs. She gasped out her final breath. He returned his knife to its usual storage place after cleaning the blade. He sat down at the typewriter yet again to sort out the chaos in his mind. Similar reasons provoked me to take my mother's life also. I don't think the poor woman has ever enjoyed life as she's entitled to. She was a simple young woman who married a possessive and domineering man. All my life until I ran away from home to join the Marine Corps, I was a witness to her being beat at least once a month. Then, when she took enough, my father wanted to fight to keep her below her usual standard of living. I imagine it appears that I brutally killed both of my loved ones. I am only trying to do a quick and thorough job. If my life insurance policy is valid, please see that all the worthless checks I wrote this weekend are made good. Please pay off all my debts. I am 25 years old and have never been financially independent. Donate the rest anonymously to a mental health foundation. Maybe research can prevent further tragedies of this type. Charlie wrote a letter to whomever would find Kathleen. It was regarding their dog. Give our dog to my in-laws. Tell them Kathy loved Chaucy very much. R.W. Leisner, Needville, Texas. Charlie wrote a final missive to his brother Patrick. It wouldn't be easy since Patrick was shaped more by their father than Charles Jr. Pat, you are so wrong about Mom. Maybe someday you will understand why she left Daddy. Pat, Mom didn't have any desire to harm Daddy whatsoever. She just wanted what she had worked for. She really needed that $40. Thank you for sending it. She'll never forget about that. Should Mother, I'll not. The divorce of their parents had divided them and laid waste to their relationship. This letter was Charles's attempt to smooth things over between them. Charles wrote a letter to Johnny. Dear Johnny, Kathy and I enjoyed your visit. I am terribly sorry to let you down. Please try to do better than I have. It won't be hard. John, Mom loved you very much. He ended with, if you can find it in your heart to grant me my last wish, cremate me after the autopsy. His next move was to place the papers on which he wrote his thoughts in an envelope. He wrote, Thoughts of the day. He added, I never could quite make it. These thoughts are too much for me. Charles Whitman was on schedule. He called Kathleen's employer to tell them she wouldn't make it to work that day, just like he planned. He still had a trunk he had used when he was serving with the Marines. The items he packed: gallon jug of gasoline, ropes and clothesline, a compass, an alarm clock, a pipe wrench, spare clothing, sunglasses, cans of pork and beans, a loaf of bread, a can of Spam. He included any other items he figured might come in handy throughout the day. After cashing some checks at the bank, Charlie went to a rental agency to get a dolly to carry all his supplies. Next stop was a hardware store, where he purchased a rebar, a machete, a locking penknife, and a reconditioned M1 carbine rifle. The merchant who processed the transaction was taken aback by Whitman's decision to purchase such a hefty firearm. Charles explained to him that he was going to use it to hunt feral pigs. At the time, the state was encouraging hunters to kill feral pigs because they had become a pest and a danger to the locals for all kinds of reasons. Farmers especially contended with feral hogs on a daily basis. The hogs were not the kind from which slaughterhouses derived bacon. They were tough. When provoked, they posed a significant threat to the unarmed. This is still true today. Hence, the shopkeeper believed Whitman when he used that criterion as a smokescreen. Still, the amount of ammunition Charlie bought was not typical for a hunting trip, no matter what the nature of the beast. Even elephant poachers in Africa don't discharge as much bullets as Charles Whitman purchased that day. But of course, the customer's story for spending profligate amounts of money at their business matters not at the end of the day. Ultimately, the cashier was more than willing to accept Charlie's money, even if it was all in the form of checks, which were soon to bounce. The next stop on Charles Whitman's shopping spree was Sears. Remember when we didn't have to buy everything at places like Walmart because we had money? Sears was one of those places. When I was a kid growing up in the 1980s, I dog-eared the Christmas Wish Book catalog that Sears sent out every year. Unlike me, Charles didn't do this shopping at Christmas, and he didn't buy any Transformers or G.I. Joe toys. Nothing that wholesome. He bought a green rifle case and a shotgun. Not the kind that discharged water, as I would have owned. That shotgun of his was a real firearm. He bought them on a payment plan. Installments of blood, as it would turn out. This was the last of the day's shopping, and he headed home. Charles had more preparation to do for the day's activities. He sat down on his front porch as Kathleen's corpse advanced beyond rigor mortis in the Texas heat. I have experienced Texas summer heat firsthand, and man, like a jackass, I assumed it would be a dry heat. To quote the comedian Louis Black, maybe I should have put deodorant on my genitals. Anyway, Charles took a hacksaw to his shotgun and sawed it down to street gang level. When his mailman showed up, he mentioned to Charlie that he was pretty sure it was illegal to modify a shotgun like he was. Having modified his shotgun for maximum impact, Charles loaded his car's trunk with the heavy artillery. Somewhere, Charlton Heston got an erection of mysterious origins. A shotgun, a Remington 400 hunting rifle with a 4X scope, a 6mm Remington hunting rifle, the M1 carbine, a .357 Magnum, a Luger, a Galaxy Brassia pistol. Aside from the sawed-off shotgun, all the rest of his guns would have been NRA approved. He placed them all in his dolly for transportation. Cognizant of the fact that the tasks he was about to carry out would soil his clothing considerably, he put on a set of khaki coveralls. To avoid appearing too militant, he put on a green jacket. At 10:30 a.m., he called his mother's supervisor to notify them that she wouldn't make it to work that day. Charlie drove to the campus of University of Austin. He didn't want to be too obvious about what he was about to do, so he approached campus security guard Jack Rodman at the parking lot and requested a parking pass, which was granted. Charles flashed a badge he still possessed since he was a research assistant. As Charles maneuvered his way through the parking lot, he looked up at the tower. In the world of Charles Whitman, this was comparable to Devil's Tower, which featured prominently in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Ultimately, everyone at that campus would have preferred a UFO landing than what transpired that day. That tower, it symbolized a way for him to make his mark on the world. As he grew up, he existed to please his father, whose love came with many conditions and may never have existed at all. Charles Jr. had failed at many things in life: academia, the military, his marriage, being raised by a man who was quick to remind him of his finite utility. It was no wonder he came to view himself as insignificant and worthless. Whenever he had guests from out of town, he would take them to the observation deck of the tower. Up there, ushering them through a sweeping overall view of the city, he didn't feel so insignificant. It gave him a feeling like he had a handle on the world, even if it was always tenuous and temporary. Up there, he felt like he was truly home, king of the castle, the literal feeling of being above everybody else. From up there, everybody else was an ant or a cockroach, depending on the individual. 11:30 a.m. Charles Whitman rolled the dolly through the entrance of the main building and toward the elevator. The button did not illuminate. All his planning and preparation, and now this. He had committed murder and destroyed his credit rating for this moment, and he couldn't count on an elevator. Though the building was air-conditioned, he began to sweat. It's almost like the elevator was avoiding him. And had it been a sentient being, it just might have. He was noticeably muscular. On a superficial level, it was one of his marked characteristics. But he wasn't strong enough to carry his entire arsenal up all those stairs. You would need a crane for that. If he couldn't make it up there, the authorities would find the corpses of his mother and Kathleen. And they usually looked to family members and spouses when ruling out suspects. He couldn't help perspiring when encountering a malfunctioning elevation device. How would he do during interrogation? A receptionist suddenly showed up, and seeing that Charles Whitman was waiting for a lift, she flipped a switch that activated the elevator. For her, this was a mundane aspect of her daily routine, but on this day, unbeknownst to her, its role in the history of U of A would be forever remembered. She smiled at him. He was delighted to hear the ping sound when the elevator doors opened. He said to her, smiling for probably the first time in weeks, "Thank you, ma'am. You don't know how happy that makes me." He wheeled the dolly inside and pressed the 27th floor button, the very top floor of the tower. On the 27th floor, Charles found himself faced with the final hurdle in his journey that day. There was a 3-floor climb to get to the observation deck. Even for a man who worked out as much as he did, it came as a challenge. He climbed the stairs with a red and sweaty face. You would have thought his fitness level was at 2024 standards. The observation deck had a receptionist of its own, 51-year-old Edna Townsley. She worked at the university since the days when there were elevator operators. When she took in the sight of Charles and his attire, she assumed he was a maintenance man. Nobody mentioned anything to her about repairs, though. The man dug through the dolly he lugged with him. He didn't even look in her direction. She got up and approached him to introduce herself, because that was just her way. He took a tool out of the dolly she didn't recognize. She didn't realize it was a rifle until Charlie held it in both of his hands and hit her in the eye with the butt. This action broke her eye socket and a section of her skull. She fell face first to the floor. She went into convulsions. Charlie bludgeoned her with the butt. He hoped this would put an end to the convulsions, but he assumed incorrectly. There was a sofa close to the secretary's desk. He pulled Edna's body over to it and concealed her beyond the view of onlookers. That is, if they made it beyond the elevator doors. Just as Charlie was about to unload his arsenal, he heard someone enter. 2 people, actually. Just like Charles and Kathleen looked out over the campus and the city of Austin, whilst daydreaming aloud about their future together, Don Walden and Cheryl Botts had done the same. On this occasion, they had been so deeply in conversation, they were never cognizant of Charles Whitman's presence and his attack on Edna Townsley. In their world, at that moment, there was only their love, a world populated only by 2. They were startled to see Charles, but he melted the ice by smiling and saying, "Hi, how are you?" Strangely, they didn't think anything of the fact that Charlie was holding a rifle in his hands in that particular location. Dawn assumed Charles went up there to take pot shots at pigeons. They were tired of pigeons shitting on everything, so they weren't going to miss them. Cheryl and Dawn headed up the stairs. Charlie sprang into action once the reception area was clear. He created a barricade at the entrance to the stairwell. He slid the desk over in place and supported it with some furniture in back. The next task was to determine where he would situate his arsenal. There was a silence in the air, accompanied by peace, until it was disrupted by the ping of the elevator. He could hear both male and female voices. A man named M.J. Gabor brought his family to visit his sister, Marguerite. He had a wife named Mary and 2 sons, Mike and Mark. Mike was an Air Force cadet, and his brother looked to follow in those footsteps. The entire party was excited about seeing the sweeping view of Austin at the observation deck. Mike and Mark, when encountering the barricade, laughed about it and squeezed through. Charles observed this with envy. His father never allowed him to be a child and enjoy a carefree moment of mirth. His father made him feel like if he did something that didn't supplant his status as a father, it was a waste of time and a point of shame. If only Mike and Mark had been aware that they were about to pay a price for the substandard parenting of Charles Whitman Sr. Charles Whitman Jr. took up his shotgun and discharged with both barrels. Mark continued to laugh for about a nanosecond before a huge hunk of his head was blown off. A punchline, courtesy of Charles Whitman Sr., and dispatched special delivery by Charles Whitman Jr. Enough gore projected up against the wall to ensure there would not be an open casket funeral, or at least not without a fair amount of plastic reconstruction. Mike took the brunt of the shot. It burrowed into his shoulder. Out of shock, he fell to the floor. He felt like he was falling down the stairs. When he grabbed at them to stop cascading downward, he found that only one of his arms was still operational. Charles reloaded the shotgun. Charles squeezed out through a space in the barricade and discharged another shot. Mary and Marguerite were air-holed in the chest and face. Mary dropped, dead before she hit the floor. Marguerite was still conscious, though clearly not rejoicing as she screamed bloody murder. Though still alive, she couldn't move. She could barely even think. She was running on pain and fear. As Charles reloaded yet again, the observation deck grew silent and still. Charles was assured of Marguerite's pending mortality. MJ and William were aware of some kind of commotion upstairs. They heard some kind of explosion, and they knew their wives were still down there. They nearly became victims in their own right when they rounded the corner to the stairwell. Mike was still there and very much alive. He filled them in on what was happening and implored them to seek help. Otherwise, death awaited them if they advanced any closer. MJ was about to ignore this warning, but William convinced him to seek assistance, and they took the elevator down to the ground. Charles was so focused now, he was downright mechanical. He approached Edna's unconscious body and shot her in the head, putting an end to her body's final attempt to remain mortal. It was hot as hell that day. Claire Wilson and Thomas Ekman, classmates in a first-year anthropology course, agreed to drop by the student union for a cold beverage. They were a couple with a child on the way. As far as their attitudes and beliefs were concerned, they were commensurate with the times and were looking forward to their future. Thomas suddenly heard a loud cracking sound. He assumed somebody's car backfired. Obeying an impulse to look back at Claire, he discovered, to his horror, that she was splayed out on the ground, with her stomach a fountain of blood. He didn't have much time to process this or make sense of it, because a bullet blasted its way through his skull and made a salad of his brain matter. Priority target number 1 was the unborn baby. Charles Whitman was obviously not pro-life. He had no love for children and no desire to sire any. When you grow up in a dysfunctional, abusive household, it can be difficult to see how well healthy, happy families get on, no matter how many times people tell you that you shouldn't compare yourself to others. The fetus he just killed was bound to have the childhood that was denied to him. And if he had to hear one more person tell him their father was their best friend, he was going to snap. Well, that ship had sailed. The father of Claire and her baby was still alive, and both panicked and devastated. After Thomas tried to stop Claire's bleeding with his bare hands, Charles took another shot, hitting him in the heart. After all, Charles Whitman was taught how to kill by his father and the Marine Corps. He was no amateur. Robert Hamilton Boyer was a mathematician making history with his research at U of A. He and his colleagues were working on a new understanding of physics as it regarded the function of the universe. He was walking through the campus grounds with one of his PhD students, Devereux Huffman. These men understood the trajectory of bullets in motion better than most of the pedestrian traffic on the campus. and the planet, for that matter, that day. Robert didn't have time to take that into consideration as he was shot in the lower back. The bullet blasted clean through his spine and discharged bone fragments into his liver, kidneys, intestines, and bladder. A man who was considered to be among the finest minds of his generation when it came to his field was knocked unconscious immediately. Devereaux rushed to Robert's aid. By having done so, he saved his mentor's life. A bullet passed through the fleshy part of Devereaux's arm. When Devereaux realized he was under attack, he played dead, flopping down to the ground. When it was safe to do so, Devereaux tried to rouse Robert to consciousness. It was not to be, ever again. Charlie set his sights upon a new target. Charlotte Darrenshorey was a secretary employed by the university. She sought cover against a flagpole. David Matson, Roland Elke, and Tom Herman were well known throughout the campus, not just for being a tightly knit group of friends. They had all declared their intentions to join the Peace Corps. At the moment, they were on their way to have lunch with a fourth friend. David Matson had a natural proclivity to speak with his hands. It would come in handy when trying to navigate his way through language barriers in the third world. As he gesticulated his way through a conversation with his friends, he suddenly felt one of his hands explode. This development was accompanied by excruciating pain. The other two men were sprayed with a mist of bullet and brain particles. It hit Herman hard enough that he stumbled into a doorway. As they fled for cover, David screamed as he took in the sight of his hand, mortified at the state of its desecrated flesh. Roland rushed out to pull David to safety. As he did so, a bullet cut into his thigh. He fell to the ground, dropping at David's feet. Homer Kelly was the manager of Shefdall's Jewelers. He ran out and pulled the wounded indoors and did not stop until all the men were safely inside his store. Their safety was short-lived. Bullets shattered the windows and cut paths across the carpeted floor. Cabinets containing merchandise were broken by bullets. Homer took a shot just above his knee. The men he had just rescued pulled him toward the rear of the store, an area that did not open them up to further attack. For them, the assault was over. The day, however, was young. Ever the perfectionist, Charles Whitman hadn't counted on the fact that his targets would actually want to live. He envisioned himself as the man who would make the campus his slaughterhouse, with his victims falling to their death like cattle. Charles decided on another target. Thomas Ashton appeared in his crosshairs, the man who was running late for a lunchtime rendezvous with his friends, David Matson, Roland Elke, and Tom Herman. He was excited about having been approved for a deployment to Iran with the Peace Corps. He was stunned as he approached the scene that Charles Whitman had wrought. People were dead. People were bleeding. People were panicking. People were screaming. People were running. He was puzzled by it all, having encountered it all within seconds. He was even more baffled to find his shirt drenched in a red liquid. Was it part of a prank? He tried to take another step, but his legs lost all their strength. He collapsed and fell to the ground, dead within seconds. Nancy Harvey and Ellen Evgenides, a staff member and student, departed from the tower to head out for a luncheon. They heard shots and ran inside. They encountered a security guard. He took every measure to calm them, to assure them they were safe. Eventually, assuming everything was okay, the women went about their daily routine. Charlie had seen Nancy before. He found her very attractive, though he remained loyal to Kathleen. Still, he assumed that Nancy would reject him and ascribed all sorts of unsavory aspects to her offensive character, all based on supposition. He shot her in the hip. The bullet deflected off the bone and tore into Ellen's thigh, sending them both dropping to the ground. Though Charles aimed for clean kills with automatic, instantaneous deaths, he enjoyed hearing and seeing the women suffer. As for the rest of the student body, they assumed the sound of cracks and pops in the air were created by the construction crew that was working on the campus architecture. As for the screams and wails, they presumed they dovetailed with the Vietnam War protests that were always ongoing on the campus at the time. As for the latter, an older male student concluded that Ellen and Nancy were being melodramatic and told them to get up before he walked off. Alec Hernandez was a 17-year-old newspaper delivery boy with U of A as part of his route. Suddenly he heard a loud popping sound. Denver Dolman owned a bookstore on campus. He laughed when he saw Hernandez leap off his bike and tumble a full somersault and then hit the road. He was squealing from pain the entire time. At first, Denver assumed it was just a biking accident. What he didn't realize was that a bullet hit Alec's seat and shot straight up his crotch. A student named Karen Griffith witnessed the attack on Alec and rushed over to offer her assistance. Alec bled so much she nearly slipped on it. There was little she could do because a bullet hit her shoulder and deflected down to her lungs, tearing them asunder. She fell to the ground and screamed, though her vocalizations were limited as she could only spray her surroundings with blood, which she gargled on until she drowned in it. A student named Thomas Ray Carr was on his way home to rest after writing an exam when he encountered the remains of Karen Griffith. He stopped to help in any way he could. The crowds had thinned out as those who were aware of the threat fled for cover. Aiming strictly for kill shots now, Charles shot Carr, landing a bullet in his nape. The bullet became lodged in his spine. Carr lost all control over his body and fell to the ground, bleeding out alongside Karen and the other victims nearby. Throughout the subsequent hour, his body gradually shut down all functions until he was dead. It had been 10 minutes since the shooting had begun, and the police were notified. They were informed that there were reports of gunfire in the area, but an incident of its magnitude was unprecedented at the time. David Gunby nearly left the campus when he remembered that there was a book at the library he forgot to bring with him. He passed by the tower when Charles fired at him. The bullets cut through his left arm before burying themselves in his side. They broke their way through his bones and cut a path through his small intestines before coming to a stop in his kidney. Adrian and Brenda Littlefield were newlyweds, departed from the tower just in time to see a man fall to the ground. As they rushed to the man's aid, they were rewarded for their good deed with bullets. Brenda was hit in the hip and fell to the ground once her leg was no longer able to support her. When Adrian bent over to help her, he was shot in the back. Paul Sontag and his girlfriend Claudia Rutt were on the main drag of the campus, headed to a doctor's office. They ran into a mutual friend, Carla Sue Wheeler. Carla was frantic. She told them she'd heard gunfire and that there was somebody with a rifle in the UT tower. All three of them looked at the tower, as if on cue. Loud popping shots echoed throughout the campus. Paul was convinced that Carla had nothing to worry about. He hadn't seen the blood, gore, and cadavers that littered the campus grounds. Paul had not managed to reassure her, especially when a bullet zipped through his mouth and discharged its way out the back of his head. Claudia was hysterical at the sight of Paul lying there dead. Carla pulled back toward a barrier that seemed to promise protection from the sniper's bullets. As she did so, a bullet pierced a hole through her hand and concluded its journey inside Claudia's heart. The Austin Police Department dispatched 100 officers to U of A. When these situations emerge, officers have to carry out plans with very little time. The officers of the APD were going to surround the tower and install roadblocks to protect anyone else from harm. Electrician Roy Schmidt arrived once the roadblock was put in place. He initially saw it as more of an inconvenience than anything else. He mused about how he felt safe in that it would be impossible for somebody to hit him from 500 yards away. That is, until he took a bullet in his torso. It clipped his breastbone. He was in disbelief. He was told he would be safe in that spot. He gasped out a warning to all onlookers who were new to arrive on the scene. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Billy Paul Speed didn't hear the shot that killed him because it landed in his brain before it could send dispatch auditory input to his conscious mind. PhD student Harry Walczyk was at a newsstand reading a periodical when he suddenly felt a bifurcated sensation, both of liquid running down his neck and of choking. The conversation he had with the merchant was cut short, and he fell to the ground, landing on his knees. He had been shot in the chest. Billy Snowden was a basketball coach in town to get a haircut. He had left the barber shop, and he took a moment to enjoy the sunny weather and smoke a cigarette. Suddenly, a bullet hit him in the shoulder. He staggered backwards into a storefront. He was in disbelief. He didn't think he could be hit. That's the kind of complacency we all want to live with. Sandra Wilson was on Guadalupe Street when she saw Harry Walczyk fall to the ground. She rushed to his aid when the sniper's next bullet tagged her in the chest. It deflected off a rib, but its impact was not lethal. Abdul Kashab was an exchange student from Iraq. He was a chemistry major at U of A and was looking at laying down roots in Austin. He also met the girl of his dreams, Janet Paulos, and the feeling was mutual. Life was really looking up for him. The couple had become engaged. However, just as they crossed from 24th Street to Guadalupe and saw their mutual friend and classmate, Lana Phillips, on the far side of a barricade, they got hit by several bullets. Abdul and Janet tumbled to the ground in unison. Choreographed brutality. Lana watched this display in a state of disbelief. Then, she was shot in the shoulder. Irma Garcia and her boyfriend Oscar Roy-Vela just left Hogue Auditorium, situated as it was on the campus grounds, just in time to be sprayed with bullets. They were not killed, but were injured enough to fall to the ground. Some good Samaritans rushed to their aid and saved their lives by dragging them to a safer spot, endangering themselves by doing so. Avelino Esparza was shot on a construction site close to the campus. He initially assumed he was a goner, but his uncle and brother rushed over to rescue him from under the line of fire. He was taken for medical help. Marine veteran and reporter for the Associated Press, Robert Hurd, heard about what was happening and was running toward the story. The way he saw it, the story was an exclusive that could make his career, with an article being published in newspapers across the country. He didn't get to live out that dream because he sustained a severe gunshot wound to his shoulder, one so severe it required immediate medical attention. Despite all this, he was impressed by the sniper's marksmanship, saying, "What a shot!" John Allen was hiding inside the student union when 2 bullets fractured the window through which he was watching the scene. The second bullet zipped straight through an artery in his arm. When the medics arrived, they realized that the only way they could treat the wounded while maintaining their own safety was to commandeer an armored security truck and use it to pick up the victims. Funeral director Morris Holman had the use of an ambulance at all times. Knowing full well he was risking his own safety, he drove up and down Guadalupe Street, loading victims into the ambulance and taking them to the area's trauma units. Still, no good deed goes unpunished, and Morris was shot in the leg on the corner of 23rd and Guadalupe when Charlie realized what he was up to. Morris spent 45 minutes listening to a group of construction workers arguing over who would risk their lives to rescue Morris. Fortunately, Morris survived the incident. A veritable army turned out to counteract Charles. In addition to the dozens of police officers who had drawn their pistols and were aiming them at the top of the tower, many local citizens showed up with their own firearms to do what they considered to be their civic duty. Charlie's scope through which he could fire had become more limited. To protect himself against their collective arsenal, he aimed his gun through a storm grating around the base of the platform. Marine veteran Marion Lee was at that point an officer with the APD. He was dispatched in an airplane to the scene because he was known to represent the highest standard of marksmanship on the force due to his military training. Charlie returned their storm of bullets with 3 of his own. He was landing shots dangerously close to the fuselage. So close, the pilot pulled away so they could be protected. Their lives were in danger at that point. Officer Houston McCoy rushed to the scene with a rifle that was given to him voluntarily by a student. Alan Crum worked in a campus bookstore. He was once an Air Force tail gunner. He had never even fired a gun in combat, but when he found out what was going on at the tower, he ran straight to the scene. He directed traffic away from the school before the police arrived. Officer Ramiro Ray Martinez was off duty and at home when he received word that additional officers were needed at the scene. He was told he needed to redirect traffic. When he arrived at U of A, he found that somebody was already directing traffic. He went to the tower to join the rest of the officers who were retaliating against Charles Whitman. The police and area hunters hadn't caught him unprepared. He knew it would turn out that way, which is why he purchased so much ammunition. He had enough firepower to last for days. He knew the locals wouldn't take it lying down. It was Texas. He traded bullets with the marksman down on the ground. Sisters Della and Martina Martinez were visiting their friend Dolores Ortega at the university all the way from Mexico. Nobody knows who discharged the bullets, but they were both hit with shrapnel while on a rooftop. Dolores was cut across her back with a shard of broken glass. Houston McCoy was informed by the maintenance staff that there were tunnels underneath the campus buildings through which people could avoid being showered with bullets. 3 men took that route to the base of the tower: Houston McCoy, Ray Martinez, and Alan Crum. As they took the elevator to the top floor, they could have cut the tension in the air with a hacksaw, as all 3 men knew they were risking their lives. However, they knew that survivors' guilt would be difficult to live with if they did nothing, so, from what they could tell, there was no other option to be had. When the men emerged from the elevator, they walked softly, as they were still unaware of where the sniper had stationed himself. They surveyed the scene and found M.J. Gabor on a phone trying to call for EMTs. He couldn't get through because there were so many calls being placed, the lines were jammed. The men were walking up another flight of stairs when they heard something similar to a harshly drawn breath or a sob. They prepped their guns and walked around a corner. The walls and floors had been redecorated with blood and gore. There were 2 dead women on the stairs. A young man's body had been disassembled and tossed around a room. Dub Cowan accompanied the men and gave away his rifle so he could administer to the living wounded. Mike was still alive. He shouted out, "He's out there!" With Alan and Ray now cognizant that the sniper was on the outside, they aimed their firearms in that direction in case the shooter might appear and start blasting. They had a radio with them, and their contact advised them that the sniper was on the north-facing side of the tower. Ray Martinez crawled out on their observation deck past Charles Whitman's arsenal. Whitman was firing down at the civilian marksman. Charles Whitman's attack on his fellow man, fueled by misanthropic rage, now clocked in at about 90 minutes. Alan Crum charged forward but nearly fell. He dropped his rifle, catching it by the trigger. The gun discharged. Having just heard a shot in the observation deck, Charlie was enraged, but ultimately he decided he would wipe the interloper out, as he had all the people he cut down the previous 90 minutes. While Charlie was distracted by this, Houston and Ray jumped forward. Whitman was sitting in a corner, having just reloaded his rifle in haste. He aimed his rifle toward the southern corner. Ray and Charlie locked eyes briefly before Ray shot Charlie 6 times. They all failed to bring Charlie down. One bullet deflected off one of his ribs, but it was merely a flesh wound. Charlie turned to Ray, aiming for a headshot. Just then, Houston appeared and shot Charlie in the face and chest. Charlie flew back against a wall. He tried to draw breath, but blood came bubbling up his throat. His mouth was saturated. Charlie drew his gun in Houston's direction. Whitman was like a machine. Very little could take him down. Definitely not a little wound or some bleeding. Ray grabbed the shotgun from Houston's hands and shot Charlie in the face. Finally, a death rattle. After some twitches, Charles Whitman's body grew still. Houston checked his pulse. He was dead. The civilian marksmen were still firing, as they were not yet aware that the sniper was dead. Alan grabbed a white towel from Charlie's bag and used it as a white peace flag, waving to everybody from the observation deck to signal that the massacre was over. Among the injuries, Mike Gabor was forced out of the Air Force due to his injuries. His mother, Mary, was blinded and paralyzed from the neck down. Claire Wilson's womb was damaged, and the baby did not survive. Though Claire did, she was rendered infertile by the incident and would spend months learning to walk again. David Gunby and the Littlefield couple were ushered into surgery as soon as spaces became available. Gunby only had one functional kidney before the shooting. He would undergo dialysis for the remainder of his life due to having caught some shrapnel. In 2001, he was notified that the dialysis would not stop him from going blind. He discontinued the treatment and died soon afterwards. The cause of death indicated on his death certificate was homicide. In total, there were 32 wounded. 17 victims died. The citizens of Austin were deeply affected by the tragedy and did all they could to help the victims and their loved ones. There were long lineups at blood banks. They offered whatever other support they could. The following is a broadcast about the incident by KTBC News, which featured some of the principals.
KTBC Television News now presents a special program on today's mass murder in the capital city. Here is KTBC Television News editor Neil Spells.
Good evening. One of history's worst mass murders occurred here in Austin today. By official count tonight, 49 persons were hit by gunfire. There are 16 dead and 33 injured. It started last night when a man reportedly killed his wife and his mother. That same man apparently rounded up an arsenal and supplies this morning and then went to the observation deck of the University of Texas Tower. It was then that terror rained down from the tower. Charles Ward was there and described the shooting.
There must have been a hit that last time. We hear people outside of our building in an area where we can't now look safely saying, "Let's help that boy. Does he need help? Someone must be down." Maybe an empty carton of shells. Ricochet bullets bouncing off the top of the piece of the tower falling now. And the battle goes on.
Sirens screamed for the 90 minutes that the gun battle was in progress. It was hot, past 90 degrees on the ground, probably much hotter high atop the tower with the sun ricocheting off the limestone with the same intensity as the police bullets. Students, co-eds, crouched at the place where they could find safety. Austin police were reinforced in their gun battle by sheriff's deputies, by Texas highway patrolmen, by Texas Rangers, and some citizens who were deputized when they offered their services. But from the time the first call came in to the UT police at 11:48 a.m. until Austin police gunned down the man they said was the sniper at 1:22 p.m., the university campus resembled a battlefield. Dead people were lying on the hot sidewalks, and dozens of courageous persons risked death time and time again to try to save them. One funeral director driving an ambulance was shot and critically injured trying to help. An Austin policeman lost his life. A University of Texas professor was killed. Countless students and innocent bystanders fell without knowing what hit them. A boy riding a bicycle was picked off with deadly accuracy. Time and time again, men risked their lives to try to save others, and this man shown here hauling a dead man to safety was one such man. Charles Ward talked with him after he got back.
One of those who is out of breath now after running out onto the mall rescuing those who have been shot is Brian Ellison of Austin, who's been in Vietnam and has been back for 2 years. Brian, how many have you gone out to rescue?
Today, 2.
What did you have to do?
Run hard and keep low.
Did you have any trouble getting them up, or did any shots come close to you while you were out there?
No shots came close to me. Just the last one, he was dead. He was dead weight. He was a little hard to pick up. too limp. Not like someone who's knocked out.
How many have you seen that are dead today?
Just one. I hope not anymore.
But there were more, many more, and the full impact of today's tragedy still has not been felt because the magnitude of the crime is practically impossible to comprehend. Charles J. Whitman, a 25-year-old Marine veteran who earned a sharpshooter rating while on active duty. He was identified by police as the sniper. He was shot down on the observation deck by 2 city policemen. The policemen were aided by an Austin man, Alan Crum. The story of how they ended the 90 minutes of terror was told this afternoon at a news conference held by Austin Police Chief Bob Miles. Jack Bowserson was there.
When Police Chief Bob Miles held his news conference at 3 o'clock this afternoon, he described the events in which the sniper met his death. Patrolman Romero Martinez worked his way into the building where he found Alan Crum, an assistant manager of the University Co-op, and they were armed with a rifle. Martinez deputized Crum, and they took the elevator to the 26th floor along with another officer. Martinez and Crum then crept out on the walkway on the opposite corner from where Whitman was stationed. Chief Miles had a diagram prepared to illustrate what happened then.
Is drawing a diagram here that will show you roughly, which is north now, Bill?
This is north.
Okay.
South, east, west. Martinez came out here and crawled around at this point.
That's the roof over there.
This is
That's the
the
other.
looking down on top of the thing. Up here is the bell. This is the wall around the inner part of the building here. The bell is above here. Martinez came out and went around the east side crawling. Crum came out and went west this way. And as the subject was sitting here leaning up back this way with his gun pointing this direction. As Martinez rounded this corner here, he saw him with his gun in this direction. He knew Mr. Crum was coming this way, and he had to come around the corner at the same time.
Yes.
Martinez fired from here, from this point here.
As he was northwest. As he swung his rifle toward him, he fired.
As he saw him leveling the rifle, or pointing the rifle in this direction, and knowing that Mr. Crum was here.
He was pointing the rifle at Crum when Martinez
Yes.
fired.
And Martinez would come around this way.
So Martinez fired, and the reign of terror came to an end. The rifle that Whitman was aiming was a military surplus carbine, one of an arsenal of 7 firearms that were found in a footlocker that Whitman had hauled up with him. Besides the carbine, there was a 6mm Remington Magnum equipped with a 4-power scope sight, a 35 caliber pump rifle, plus a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun, 2 handguns, a .357 Magnum and a 9mm Luger, and another gun that was later discovered on Whitman's body. There were other supplies and weapons in the footlocker: a hammer, a hatchet, 2 hunting knives, one a large Bowie knife with a bone handle, gasoline, rags, a large supply of nylon cord, cans of pork and beans, a loaf of bread, a large can of water, and lots more ammunition. There was also a transistor radio. When we saw it at the station, the dial was not tuned to any station, but police speculated that Whitman may have been tuned in to a play-by-play report of the consternation he was causing as he perched there for an hour and a half this afternoon. The man here beside me is Alan Crum. He was deputized to go up on the tower with the 2 policemen who ended the gun battle. Mr. Crum, could you tell us how you happened to be in the tower building in the first place?
Well, I became involved in this when I looked out of the co-op windows and saw a boy shot across the street. I went across the street to investigate because I thought it was a small fight. And as I stepped out the door, I heard the sound of shots. And Officer Martinez and myself and Officer Day started up the staircase where we worked our way up to the next floor, and we began to search the offices up there. Where we found 3 more people. And one of these gentlemen, his family was in the corridor, and they had all been shot.
Now, the people on the 26th floor were not hurt, but the people...
No, sir. The next half flight of stairs up was where this man had shot them all in the corridor.
When did you finally locate Whitman?
It was quite a few minutes because we worked our way up. We thought perhaps he might be in this corridor, and we didn't know the building. I had to work rather cautiously. We worked our way up to the end of the corridor where a set of stairs went to the left, and I covered with the rifle for Martinez and Officer Day while they got the boy that was still alive out of the line of fire, because he told us the man was outside and couldn't see us. While Officer Day was taking care of the wounded boy, as far as I know, Officer Martinez and I, we took the stairs. And we got to the top of the stairs, and this man had barricaded the staircase with a desk and a chair and a waste can, and we figured he was either in there or out on the walk-around ledge. So we very cautiously pushed the desk out, and we saw blood on the floor, and we realized someone had been killed up there or badly wounded. And we found a lady up behind the couch. And then Officer Day joined us again, and we began to work our way out on the ledge, this walk-around ledge thing.
Did you know where he was when you actually went out on the ledge?
At this time, we still didn't know if there was one or two men up there. It was a very good possibility of two because of the fast rate of fire. We figured that we'd cover all the windows, cover the man going out the door, using our old infantry-style tactics. Officer Martinez went out first. I covered the east and south windows. He covered the door and the west windows. He went out, and they covered as much as he could also. And then we got Martinez out the door. He covered the north walk and the west walk, and I got out the door, and they came out, and they went to the northeast corner. I stayed in the southeast and worked my way slightly up the path there, and they made contact with him first. And I thought I heard him running southwards on the west walk, so I fired one shot down the walkway into the wall to try to stop him there. And again, it sounded as if he had reversed his direction and ran back to the northwest corner, where he ran into the other officers from the northwest corner, excuse me. And they were in the northeast corner, and the firefight resumed, and they terminated it right there.
As soon as the word of the sniper's attack came in, reporter Joe Roddy rushed immediately to Brackenridge Hospital. All afternoon long, he maintained a vigil there, sorting out the names of those who were dead and those who were wounded. Here's his report.
Those reported dead by the police department, verified by our hospital reports from the several hospitals that the victims were taken. We have prepared a menu board for you to read them as we read them here for you on Channel 7 News. At dead on arrival, the persons shot by the gunman apparently in the early morning hours of this morning, the wife of the gunman, Mrs. Charles Joseph Whitman, 23 years old, at 906 Jewel. The body is at Wilkie Clay Funeral Home. The gunman's mother, Mrs. C.A. Whitman, her age at the moment not available. Services pending at the Cook Funeral Home. Her body found in a downtown apartment house at 1212 Guadalupe Street. Now we will look at the list as prepared by Brackenridge Hospital officials. Dead at the hospital, 23-year-old Thomas Ashton, a resident of Redlands, California, a Peace Corps trainee. The body is at Wilkie Clay. 33-year-old Robert Boyer, a resident of 3305B Hampton Road, a professor last year at the University of Texas. His immediate family now living in Scotland, his father and mother living in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Dead on arrival at Brackenridge Hospital was 18-year-old Thomas Ekman, a resident of Barcelona, Spain. University. A student by the name of Della Martinez, a resident of 2515 Rio Grande here in Austin, but from Monterrey, Mexico, and her mother, Mrs. Morena Martinez of Monterrey, were both treated for minor injuries from fragments of shells, perhaps from a ricochet, and released from the medical center at the University of Texas. Now, in regards to the hospital situation, needless to say, it was a very trying moment. But we will tell you this because we saw it firsthand. The disaster plan, the result of many hours, weeks, months, and years of experience, worked beautifully. Preparations had been made, training orders had been given, training exercises carried out. It was fantastic to see the number of people respond to the stat conditions given by the administrator of the hospital. 15 registered nurses were in the emergency room at one time. A dozen or so private physicians left their offices, left their homes on off-duty hours and rushed to the hospital to render any kind of assistance they could.
An event such as today's history-making tragedy is sure to have an impact on the university campus. Charles Ward today attended a news conference hosted by UT officials. Here's his report.
University of Texas officials expressed that shock at a news conference on campus this afternoon. The chancellor, Dr. Harry Ransom, witnessed the mass murder from the upper floors of the tower. Dr. Ransom first read a prepared statement and then gave his personal views on the heroism shown by students.
The community is appalled, is stunned by the appalling tragedy which occurred today. University offices are cooperating fully with law enforcement agencies. No explanation of motive in any normal context is available. Mr. Whitman's academic record at the university was above average. There was no disciplinary record on his official transcript. The chairman and the chancellor expressed deep concern and sympathy for the family of those persons who lost their lives and for those who were injured and their relatives. Both noted the heroism and selflessness of students, law enforcement officers, and staff who attempted, often successfully, to rescue those hurt and in danger. To that official statement, I must add informally that from the tower, I have never seen, nor have I ever imagined, anything like it. Youngsters in white shirts who saw these things happen came out from buildings at great length and either rescued or took care of persons who were hit. It's incredible, and it's very heart-lifting, but in a moment of very deep sadness.
Charles Whitman had an uneven academic record at the university. He maintained a low C average before he entered the Marine Corps in 1963. When he returned, he brought his grade point average up to a solid B. One of the professors who knew him well is Dr. Leonard Chrysley in the Mechanical Engineering Department.
He seemed to be very well liked by the students in his class. I had him in one class myself. He did very prompt work. He did neat work. So far as I could tell, he seemed to be very happy of his family. He brought his wife up and introduced her to me. And so far as I could tell, as of fall 1962 through about May of this year, he seemed to be mature and very, very serious.
Dr. Chrysley mentioned Whitman's scouting activities. Vern Lundquist explored this facet of Whitman's life with A.G. Vincic.
He was an Eagle Scout at 12. And 12 years of age for an Eagle Scout is very, very unusual.
How would you describe his association with the Scout members, with the boys that he worked with?
He was there only a short time in that capacity because of his other work and studies and so forth, taking up most of his time. But he was our Scoutmaster for 3 or 4 months. And during that time, we just all loved him. I mean, he was good. He was good to the boys. He worked the boys. He took them out on campouts and worked them and took 5-mile hikes. And he was just a typical scout.
Whitman's life was also tragic in the effect on his wife and mother. As you know, both were found dead when the police moved into their follow-up investigation of the shooting. Darrell Davis went to the homes of the two women and came back with this report.
The bizarre and disturbing incident of the sniper was followed very quickly by the discovery of the body of Whitman's wife at their home at 906 Jewell Street in South Austin. And almost simultaneously in another part of town, Whitman's mother was found murdered. Mrs. C.A. Whitman's body was discovered in her residence at the Penthouse Apartments, 1212 Guadalupe. At the Whitman home, Lieutenant Merle Wells talked with newsmen about the discovery and about a note the man had written.
In this letter, he said that he was going to kill his wife and mother to save them the embarrassment of what he was about to do. that the reason for him killing them is that he has been having severe headaches and has been to a psychiatrist. And
He said that about himself?
yes. No, I don't.
What is the condition of the house right now?
It's very neat and clean, and it's not anything out of order. She's lying in bed on her back. She has 3 stab wounds instead of 2, as we thought at first, and we think that they were caused by that large hunting knife that was with the stuff up at the tower.
The 23-year-old wife, Kathleen, was a biology teacher at Lanier High School. She was working for the telephone company this summer. Police were tipped off to the killings when they learned Whitman had called the telephone company this morning to report that his wife would not be at work. At a news conference this evening, Police Chief Bob Miles said both the mother and the wife had been shot. Investigators at the scene, as was included in the film interview, told newsmen the wife had been stabbed 3 times. The discrepancy of these reports apparently can be put as the result of the simple and complex, confused situation. Chief Miles said the typewritten note left by Whitman requested an autopsy on himself to see why he did it. In the note, he said that he would kill. Whitman grimly typed out the reason for killing his wife, to save her embarrassment. About his mother, Whitman wrote, "If there's a heaven, Mother is there. If there is no heaven," he said, "she's resting now after living 25 years with my father, who I hated with a mortal passion." And then on the apparently carefully typed out letter, a handwritten scrawl, 3 a.m., wife and mother dead. 9 hours later, the massacre from the tower would begin. Here again is Neil Spells.
KTVC newsmen Phil Miller and John Thawley were shot at several times today by the sniper as they moved around the campus to try to ferret out what was going on. Thawley actually rescued some of the wounded victims in between shooting film to record what was going on. Miller helped load the dead city policeman into an ambulance. Here's Miller's report on what he went through as he covered today's story.
I pulled over to the curb just south of the West Mall entrance and got out of the car. Joe Lee, one of our photographers who came with me, ran to the side of the architecture building while I ran across Guadalupe and got down behind some cars. Joe and I had heard firing as I parked the car, but it seemed sort of far off in the distance. But as I ran behind a car, the shot from the rifle sounded like it was almost in my ear, and I could hear the bullet ricochet. In all honesty, I still didn't realize just exactly what was going on. But some of the students crouched behind the car with me said the rifleman really was on the tower and had the whole campus pinned down. When I asked if anyone had been hit, someone said 5 people that he knew of, including a little boy on a bicycle. I ran inside one of the stores on the drag and made my first report for Radio 59, noting that occasionally someone would run from one shelter to another, but the running was always sporadic, in short bursts, like on an open battlefield. I went back down the steps and saw a policeman making his way along the wall toward the steps leading to the mall. There might have been more than one patrolman, but all I saw was one. I wanted to get to him to try and find out what the police were going to do. I kept close to the wall, but the policeman, I guess he thought he was sheltered by the trees above the wall, was walking sort of crouched over, but the sniper could see him. I yelled at the policeman, but he didn't hear me, and I was just about 10 yards away when I heard the rifle on the tower and the patrolman fell to the ground. I don't know how that guy saw the policeman or even how he could have shot him, but he did. I learned later it was Billy Speed. A girl was fairly close to me, and she just kept saying, "He shot the policeman, he shot the policeman." I went back to the steps, some more students ran up. The other officers moved Speed to some shade, and then we all carried him back near the entrance to the post office where we put Speed in an ambulance. I can't remember how I got to the Catholic Student Center, but I do remember going over a fence through someone's backyard and hear the rifle fire again and a whine through the trees. There were some people in the backyard huddled against a garage, I think, but when that rifle fired, I really cleared that fence. I called the station again from the Student Center and went out the back way, doubled back across University Street, and I could hear a radio saying the sniper was firing south. Well, that's where I was, so I waited a while, and then heard he was firing north, and I ran to the median in the center of the street. I stayed behind a tree, but that tower was in plain view. I ran from the tree across to the other part of the street, and I heard the rifle fire, and something smacked that tree behind me. I dove to the ground, got behind a car. I waited a pretty long time then, and I remember wondering if he really shot at me or whether it was just my imagination. And why me? He didn't know me. Death is always such an impersonal thing. It's him or her, but not me. So why me? I ran some more. I probably remember that most of all. I always seem to be running somewhere.
Governor John Connolly, a man who has also been felled by a sniper's bullet, said tonight in Rio de Janeiro that he is canceling the remainder of his South American trip due to today's tragedy. Patrolman Ramiro Martinez was at home cooking steak when he heard the reports of the shooting on the radio. He rushed over in his car. As he arrived, 6 persons were lying on the mall. He found 4 bodies in the tower. Martinez and others rushed in on the tower deck and shot Whitman down. Dr. Harry Ransom at the University of Texas announces that all summer classes at the university will be suspended tomorrow. Classes will resume Wednesday. Campus flags will fly at half-mast during this week. The story of the sniper is not ended. It's not ended for the families who have loved ones to bury and loved ones to care for. It's not ended for the police and other officials, including the governor, who intend to carry out the investigation into this unbelievable tragedy. And it's not ended in the quest for facts. For most of Austin, the events of this day have been more than any could comprehend. This is Neil Spells. Thank you and good evening.
This has been a news special produced by the KTBC TV News Department.
The most tragic aspect of the aftermath of this incident is that events of its kind would continue to occur for the years to come. At this point, Americans have become inured to mass shootings, that is, unless they happen to witness them firsthand. But that firsthand experience with the horror of gun violence hasn't changed anything. I hate to leave you with a pessimistic sentiment, but these shootings are here to stay. Charles Whitman contributed to those statistics. That's the way of things. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.